Well, film quality often requires 4K, 8K, or higher textures. Okay, attention to detail on close-up shots, on medium shots, is often only obtained once you get into the 8K and 16K and sometimes even 32K format. On Seeing Tomorrow, as you can see here, a lot of the close-up shots, each particular piece of the Jezebel robot's armor, the bump maps and the normal maps and the color maps, each map was 8,000 pixels. So each map, okay, which if you look at his arm, shoulder shield, for instance, that shoulder shield contained a color map, a bump map or a normal map, a reflection map, and also a specular map. Those four maps each were 8K by 8K and actually lived as 200 megabyte images being piped through the renderer. So just that one section contained 800 megabytes of, of textures. Times that times the number of plates and panels and textured items on his body, and it can easily become terabytes of information. It has to be processed by your renderer. You don't want to get into that if you're not serious about it. That's something that's gonna double your render time. It's gonna slow your process down, and you've got to have the hard drive to support that. Okay. So as I said, if you're doing film quality, it's normal for you to have bump or normal maps, a reflection pass or a specular pass, or as far as texture maps. Each one of those maps, if done as I said, each one of those maps, if done at 4K or 8K, can fill up a hard drive easily. And also result in a lot of render time. Okay. As I said, it doubles or triples or even quadruples your texture display burden. So now your graphics card is doing double duty to just display those textures. And in some cases, you can't display those textures. Your graphics card can't do it, and also move in real time. So we'll get into that, and that's something we'll get into actually in part 2 is what that looks like and the burden it takes on. As I said, for example, at 8K, each map will be roughly 200 megs flattened. So for instance, we had a map, and we'll show you this in the second part 2 of this video. We had a map that was in Photoshop, and once we combined all the layer passes, which it contained a dirt layer, a mask layer, a dirt mask layer, a scratches, there was a reveal to reveal the bare metal underneath the actual color coating. Okay, so it looked like the paint had been scratched off of the surface of the model. So all told, we had about 8 layers. Well, each layer was about 200 megabytes. So quickly, the size of the file in Photoshop was about 2 gigs. Now, we've got a machine that contains 32 bits of RAM, and we've got a pretty beefy NVIDIA Quadra workstation card. So it was able to kind of handle the texture. It's kind of able to handle the textures and process those things. But if you're someone and you don't have access to that type of workstation, you have access to like a laptop or something like that, you can quickly find yourself with a laptop that is bogged down, with a workstation that is bogged down, and what should take you maybe at half an hour or maybe 15 minutes at most to process a texture, quickly becomes a full day thing, and you're behind on schedule. You're frustrated, and your team is frustrated. Okay. So just as I said, files that size will take a long time to render, and they require a workstation graphics card to view in the application. So once you get into an application such as Cinema 4D or Maya or Max, your wait times just to do things like orbit around the model are going to expand if and it robs you from the fact of being able to look at those textures in context. Okay. And we'll get into some ways to run around that in part two when we look at applications like Mari, who allow you to deal and accommodate huge file sizes, huge amounts of texture maps, and also run in real time, which is something that Mari and a couple other applications really shine when it comes down to, and that really sets them apart as far as the difference between using something like Photoshop and using an application, a dedicated texture and shading application such as Mari. Okay. Last but not least, you also have to keep in mind that you got multiple outputs. That film quality often requires that you output multiple outputs from your renderer to be given to the comper, the compositing artist, to be placed in the Nuke or After Effects. Now, is it okay for you to output a beauty pass and that be it, which would just be your color, everything come together? Yes. That was the workflow that we followed for Seeing Tomorrow. We really that decision was made because we did not have the extra. That decision was made because we didn't have the extra seat available as far as someone there to comp the files. That duty I or someone else would have had to follow double duty to try to actually sit down and comp the files in. We made a decision at that point because of the budget and because of the time span we had that it made more sense to just perfect that beauty pass, make sure that we were getting what we wanted out of the initial renderer, and then once we comped it back into After Effects, we could do some crushing of the blacks and do our best to make that pass fit inside of the background. Okay. Now you lose flexibility that way. You're not. There's some passes and definitely some shots in the film, and we'll cover this in part two. There were some parts of the film, parts of the webisode where I definitely would have liked to be able to have the flexibility to alter certain outputs and not mess with other outputs. And I'll give you for example, when we had done the lighting, the indoor HDRI lighting for the robot, and we found that the yellow that we used, the yellow metallic surface that we used, responded really well to a color temperature of between 4,000 and 4,800 Kelvin. And we got really good response from the yellow. It really shined. Around 4,800, it became neutral, so you were really getting the yellow popping, and it didn't have any kind of color cast to it, and everything was great. Well, once we proceeded to do the shots, the outdoor shots, which were using a different HDRI map at that point, it introduced blue into that yellow, and we really started to get the red component in the yellow started to be sapped out. So in initial comps, what you saw is a yellow. What you saw as an output that didn't quite look like it was outside. It did give you it conveyed the notion that this robot was outside, and you definitely felt like he was an outside environment. But the color was sapped. He had no color. He was lifeless. That the yellow. The red component in the yellow was really gone. And we actually had to go back and then, do a curves adjustment and put some of that red back in there to try to balance it out to make it look better. Warming the image up, actually put it in a little bit of conflict with the outdoor stuff. But it's a choice we had to make at that point. Now, if I had those multiple outputs, I could have gone in and adjusted adjusted one of the passes in the multiple outputs, and then left the other passes, such as the shadows and stuff like that, and left those guys alone, and it would have been less noticeable that color shift had occurred. But as I said before, lack of budget, lack of time, and you're on the fly. This is independent film. You have to make some decisions early on and live with them. And those are some of the things that we'll talk about in depth in the second video, is making some decisions that if you're doing huge budget or normal budget video, you can make those decisions, and then if it doesn't work out right, you can make those changes very quickly, and actually go back and maybe do a second render, and make some changes and some tweaks. Normally with independent film, you're rendering the first time, you got to try to get it right as best you could, and you got to live with the results and then try to fix it as best you can. But you don't want to end up bogged down there either. There's sometimes when you really don't want to, you don't want to output something in CG and then spend all your time and your budget in the compositor. Okay? Okay, so we're going to move on to the next part of part one, and I'll talk to you in a minute.